Hello from London. It's 1 minute before 8 o'clock here in London town, down in Brixton, which is where I'm based at How to Get Fluent Towers. It's Dr. Popkins here, and Big Ben has just struck 8 o'clock. So I'm going to kick off with this live YouTube Q&A. I hope you can hear me. If you can, could you just type please in and say that you can hear the audio? That would be useful before we start. Can you hear me? Hello? Mike, how's that picking up? That seems to be picking up. Let's just try with this mic. Is that picking up better? I don't know. Should be, I hope. Hold on. Whoops. I can see. Sorry. You can hear, folks. Hello. Okay, we've got Jay here. Jay is obviously a Japanese learner. Welcome. We've got A Toast and we've got Helen as well. Helen's question came in this afternoon, I think. Well, okay, now you can hear me. I'm not a great guy with technology. It's something I'm trying to improve on. And one of the things I wanted to sort out was an external mic. So for most people, that would be pretty elementary. But that's something I wired up this time. Never seems to go that simply. Anyway, thank you very much for joining. I will jump into the questions in a couple of moments. First, I just wanted to thank all of you who support this YouTube channel. My main gig, if you like, started off on my blog and website, howtogetfluent.com. And then I initially started to upload videos onto YouTube when I was doing group language challenges to chart my progress and to show it to other participants in the challenges. And then I got the vlogging bug, if you like, inspired by some other language vloggers and language YouTubers. And I've been going full on with YouTube really for the last year and a half and doing a lot of vlogging. It's something which in terms of effort in and reward out, I'm not always sure how much sense it makes, in that it's a lot of effort, but I love creating particularly the vlogs and also the quick tip videos. So if you have comments about the nature of the channel, maybe at the end I'll come back to that and how it should develop, then from you as people who are subscribers to the channel, I'd love to hear what you think, because it's all about, in the end, interacting with the audience. There's nothing better than that. That's one of the things that gives me the greatest pleasure with it. Anyway, we've got to 1,000 subs, and I thought this was as good an occasion as any for me to kick off with questions and answers. I have a list because I asked you through YouTube and also in the How to Get Fluent Language Learners Facebook group, which you can join if you haven't done already, and through the email list, which you can also sign up to, the email club from howtogetfluent.com. I asked for questions, so I've had quite a few in. So I'm going to start with Helen's question because Helen is here at the moment. So Helen asked, Helen was saying she finds it difficult to study a regular slot every day. And because if she fails to achieve it, then she feels that she's, failed big time in general. I thought this was quite an interesting perspective because it's always one of the tips that I give to people: establish a regular slot and that it's better to do a little bit every day. But Helen was saying she feels that she prefers to binge, as she put it, and do an hour or two, a few hours study, less frequently, obviously. How do I respond to that? I think maybe, first of all, there's nothing wrong with doing a 2-hour study slot, obviously. A binge is a negative, jokey word for it that Helen gave us, but there's nothing wrong, of course. If you could do 2 hours every day, that would be even better. But say you're doing 2 hours a week. If you're going to do that, first of all, how should you use that to optimal effect? And I think one of the key words there is so-called interleaving, which the cognitive scientists tell us is the best way to commit a block of time to study. So don't just focus on one thing during, say, those 2 hours. Don't just say, I'm going to learn the irregular verbs in the past tense, but weave in and out. Take several topics, several different types of activity and do a shorter period on each one. So maybe 20 minutes on one thing, 20 minutes on another, rather than the opposite of that, which is called block practice. Now, this is counterintuitive. You'd think it would be better to concentrate on one exercise, one particular area of language or one particular skill, whether it's just writing or just listening. But apparently it is more effective to interleave because it forces you to come in and out of an activity. Providing you've got a period of concentration, then you can switch to something else and then come back. That's a good way to fill a longer study slot in an interesting way. I would say, though, Helen, if you feel that you're setting yourself up for failure, one way you could approach that is reframe the language study slots. I still think there's a huge advantage to having a regular study slot at a certain point in the day. If you feel that you are, not achieving, maybe you can set the bar a bit lower. Say, I'm going to do half an hour, not 7 days a week, but 5 days a week. If you say 7 days a week, you're setting yourself up for failure because something could come in the way. If you say I'm going to do it 5 days a week or 4 days a week, then you miss one day, you've got time to catch up. So you're not setting yourself up for failure. And I think that sort of mind trick is a good idea with the short study slot, because in general, the advice is a little often is better than just blocked, just a binge period. Of course, longer periods more often is even better still. So does that sound reasonable to you? I don't know. Jay says he loves she loves the idea of learning languages, but you're bad at managing your time. Again, I suppose this sort of follows on, Jay, doesn't it? Try and build it into your life. I like to do my language study in half-hour blocks, and I try and fit in half an hour before I go out to work. Or, diolch Helen, sometimes, in the evening. It's harder for me in the evening because although I'm very alert in the evenings, you're tired. There can be social demands on you. If you have a family, for example, then you may have a meal together or something in the evening, have to get the kids to bed. Whereas it's a great idea in the morning if you can get up a bit earlier when it's quieter and build in that study. So try and allocate, Jay, a certain amount of focused time each day when you're going to study. And if you don't feel you have the time, reduce the amount. Just try and do 20 minutes. I think any less than that, if you're sitting down to work with a textbook or to do a language exchange, obviously becomes an impractically small amount of time. But try and carve out a regular slot. And if you find you're just trying to do too much, the other thing is I'm into, giving it to you the honest truth. Sometimes you have to reduce other activities, cut something out of your life, because we're all inefficient. I certainly feel I waste a lot of time. And sometimes you just have to try and do less so that you're not building yourself up again for something of a fall. Toast says, I start at 10 p.m. and I'm not allowed to sleep till I've done 30 new words and 30 minutes listening. That sounds a great idea. I presume, Toast, you mean it's you who doesn't let yourself sleep, and it's not that somebody's standing over you with a big stick, as it were. I'm always scared of studying just before bedtime because I'm worried that my mind is going to be whirring too much and I won't be able to switch off. But it's horses for courses, isn't it? What I do like to do personally, if I can't sleep in the middle of the night, is read one of my advanced languages where it's much easier for me to read. And I find that or reading in English for that matter, helps me get to sleep. Deciding what to study, Jay. Good point. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed and you've got too many materials. Try and set yourself a plan each week what you're going to do, or just stick to, depends what level you are, stick to one textbook. That's what I like to do. So at the moment I'm focusing on Japanese. I have this book, Japanese from Zero, which I'm working through, which is a beginner's book. Therefore, what I'm going to do is really set for me. Now, I know a lot of people don't like textbooks. They find them too restrictive and boring. It sort of splits half and half. I'm a fan, but you do need some sort of plan then, because I know what it's like. You sit down, you don't know what you're doing, and then you sort of while away the time. I sometimes find this when I'm trying to decide, am I going to go for a run or am I going to do some language study? study, and I end up dawdling. Before I know where I am, I don't do either. So I think planning in advance what you're going to do makes a lot of sense, I'd say, Jay, for that. Jay has too much time. Motivation is the issue, really. So again, yeah, okay. So it's about going back maybe and thinking why you want to do this. Or is it actually about discipline? If you're clear, Jay, on the reasons, and you really do want to learn the language, and it's not just a vague idea, like you're thinking, oh, it would be nice to be able to run a marathon, or it would be nice to win Wimbledon tennis or something championship. If something that you're really serious about, then maybe you just have to forget about motivation almost and build the habit and focus on the discipline. Try and, step aside, look at yourself from outside and almost laugh at your whims, because how you feel each day often depends on what the weather's like, what you had for breakfast, how well you slept, and so on. So if it's just about discipline and building a habit, sometimes you'll find if you can get over that initial first 10 minutes and get into focus so that distractions are cut out, you'll be able to work a bit more easily. And the appetite comes with eating. That's another thing, isn't it? One way I use to get started is I always have this timer. So it's a 30-minute countdown timer. And once that is pushed, it starts ticking. I am not allowed to do anything else. That's it. I can't check the phone, switch the phone off. I can't nip. I suddenly remember I need to get something from another part of the house or something. It has to wait. And often it's hard for the first few minutes, but then I get into the flow. If you're studying relevant, interesting materials, doing an activity which feels meaningful to you, you can get into the flow and get over that initial resistance. I often find that starting resistance in whatever productive activity I'm engaging in, to be honest, whether it's going for a run, getting my head down at the office. For me, it seems always that there's that resistance at the beginning. So maybe again, reframe it not as motivation, but as maintaining a habit, and that might help, providing you've got clear on the overall vision of why you want to study this language or why you need it. And if you can sharpen up why you're doing it, what you're doing it for, that will then feed in so far as it depends on motivation. So Helen also says she likes studying in the evening. 10 p.m. is a good time. Great. I don't think it has to be in the morning. It's whenever it feels most natural for you. Maybe, aside from our biology, you're a night owl or a morning lark, sometimes distractions in the house or your apartment are less at a certain time of day. So now I want to move to another question which came in from, keep typing your questions if you want, from Clayton earlier. Clayton's a regular in the Facebook group, and he was asking, why have I decided to learn Basque rather than Spanish? Anybody else learning Basque who's here live? I don't know. It may seem a bit of a bizarre choice. I will get to Spanish at some time, I'm sure. It sounds a beautiful language. Of course, it's a very widely spoken language, but I'm interested in lesser used languages a lot too. I first learned Welsh. It was the first language I got really fluent in. And some of the issues around language revival and the status and the minority languages are very similar in the Basque country and in Wales. So I'm interested in linguistic politics. That's one reason that drew me there. I started to visit the Basque country with some Welsh friends who had similar interests. We got there, we discovered it's a beautiful place with great food, great scenery, very interesting people. And as I found with Welsh, when you start to learn a lesser used language, it's often really appreciated by the locals. They start to take you under their wing, and it can open more opportunities than a big language that everybody's learning almost, sometimes it feels. So those are the reasons that I've been learning Basque. And of course, once you get into a language and a culture, you discover more and more about it. And it becomes, I think, even more interesting. You get drawn in, and that helps with the motivation too. Another great thing that helps with motivation, I think, to go back to JRS's point, was, community. So it's not just, habit is one thing. Another thing I always stress is community. So if you start to get to know people through the language, try and combine it with an interest. So if you're into golf, or you're into K-pop, or you're into basket weaving, or you're into whatever it is, try and find a group, in a meetup group if you live in a populous area, or something online, a chat room, Facebook group, where you can engage with people who are interested in the same thing. Even if you're at quite a beginner level and you can't type much in yourself yet, you can start reading and start interacting, and you start to get to know people, as it were. And that's happened to me with Basque as well. So with the London Basque community, I find I'm getting WhatsApp messages in Basque. So my motivation now is irrelevant. I've got to respond and understand to these messages, because I'm getting drawn into a social web of obligations, the support of community. And so the support of native speakers and other learners can be a great thing for giving meaning and therefore motivation for you as well. Hello, Jockey, 14, thanks for joining. Ronald asked me, was waren deine Begründe, genauer die Sprache zu lernen, die du gelernt hast, insbesondere die späteren Sprachen wie Baskisch und Japanisch? So he asked me in German, what reasons did I have for learning the languages I've chosen, and particularly the most recent ones, Basque and Japanese? Well, I just talked about Basque. Japanese I'm learning because I'm going to Japan, I hope. I haven't got the ticket yet, but to the Polyglot conference in October. And I've always wanted to learn an Eastern an Asian language with a different writing system. That's another attraction for me for Basque, actually. I'm a bit of a language lover. So I've studied French and Italian and some basic Portuguese. So for me, Spanish is a variation on that Latin theme, the Romance languages, if you like, whereas Basque is something completely different. It's a language isolate. That means it's not related to any other language. Japanese is the same. So it's a wonderful challenge to learn more about languages. Also, engaging with the Japanese writing system helps me to give good advice to other language learners too. One of the things I do is language mentoring and language coaching, and it helps if I've understood different types of language to be able to help people and mentor people who are studying those languages too, because I know some of the challenges. And I'm finding learning the Japanese characters, the kanji, based on the Chinese ones, it takes a lot of time, and it's going to take me a lot of time, but it's a fascinating exercise. And to me, that's a bit like a puzzle as well. It's almost separate from learning to speak the language and learning the other two writing systems that they have in Japanese, which are much more similar in the way that they work to our phonetic-based system. And it's a great, puzzle to decipher. And I don't want to live out my days, really, on this earth without having been initiated into the Chinese character system. What is it? It's not a load of squiggles. How does it work? So it's something I'm hungry to find out about. So Jockey says I'm not German. No, Jockey, I'm English, of Welsh and English descent, and we're in London today. So, but I do German. It's one of my advanced languages. And Ronald, who's one of the people who's in the email club from howtogetfluent.com, asked me his questions in German, which was great. And he also asked how languages has become my main focus overall. I don't know. I got the bug somehow. I was pretty average at languages at school, but to me, it was a door into a different culture, and it opens another window in your personality, doesn't it? It changes and widens your perspective, and it just feels great to me, actually. It's a miracle how we can manage to learn one language, and to do the same thing in another is always exciting, because for me, it's a mix of you study, you practice, which is a conscious thing, but whether the language flows or not is a semi or almost subconscious thing. And when you get fluent, you're speaking almost without thinking. You're thinking about the content, but not about the medium, the means by which it's delivered. And when you get to that sort of level in a language, to me, it's a wonderful miracle every time it happens. So that's a kick. It's a high for me. And that's what I'd say about that. And now, next, Robert asks, he's trying to learn Welsh and he's looking for some memorization tips. several people mentioned that they have difficulty remembering vocab, particularly in a language. I think, first of all, you have to remember forgetting is normal. You're going to forget words and phrases many, many times before they stick. So first of all, accept the frustration as normal, but there are techniques that you can use. So you can use mnemonics, you can try and link a word with an image or a picture, and that will help get it into your short-term memory. And then by doing, for example, spaced repetition, so trying to recall the word using perhaps flashcards or a flashcard app, the following day, and then with a gap of 2 days, and then a gap of 3 days, gradually growing gaps, that's a way to get the words into your long-term memory. So that's one trick. Use mnemonics for short-term memorization, and then spaced recall, not just repetition, but actually trying to remember the words to get them into the long-term memory. Another thing you can do is learn in context. So don't just learn individual words, but also learn a lot of phrases. They are chunks, as we call them, of correct language, where you know that all the grammar that comes with them, so nice to see you today, or what time is it? Learn the phrase, don't learn the separate words necessarily. And then that will roll off your tongue more easily, and you've got the context to help you remember. Ich gehe jeden Tag in die Stadt in German. There you've got several cases there already, correctly conjugated articles also, so that you don't have to think about the grammar so much. So context really helps with memorization. It's all about using the language. You can do active things, study type things like mnemonics and images and spaced repetition. That's great. If you don't like that sort of thing, it's a question of engaging a very great deal, listening a lot, trying to read a lot, looking up again and again the same words, and it becomes a matter of practice, practice, practice. So it's normal to forget. You just have to keep, I think, pushing on while using the study tricks that appeal to you as well to help you along the way. Yes, Toast says it weirds me out too when you're going through squiggles and sounds and trying to extract the meaning from them. Exactly. Some people don't like listening to, for example, audio that they don't understand yet. Maybe I'm a bit of a masochist, but I actually quite like the music of the language even when I don't understand it. But part of the key there, I think, Toast, is to try and get what they call graded material. So if you're a beginner, try and find audio for beginners. That's why I like textbooks with audio as well. If you're an intermediate, also intermediate level material, you can find podcasts by an intermediate course that has audio with it, that sort of thing. And try and pick out at least snippets of the language that you can understand. I think we have to get comfortable as language learners as well with ambiguity, with not understanding everything straight away. We're trying to fill in the blanks and guess sometimes with reasoning from what we don't know to what we do know. And also asking. One way you can sort of do comprehension checking if you're talking to someone is instead of saying, I don't understand, you can repeat. So you could say, for example, if you don't know what time you're talking to someone, you've arranged to meet them later on tomorrow, you can sort of repeat what you think they said. Okay, so we're going to meet at 6 o'clock tomorrow then, that sort of thing. And they'll say, no, I said at 5 o'clock tomorrow, rather than always saying, I didn't understand what you said. Sometimes you can use techniques like that as well to cope with not understanding. And so that's right. So Chuck, hello, Scott, plug. Nice to meet you. Where are you from then? I don't know, Scott. Then we've got a question from Victor or Inche Bai. The name keeps changing on YouTube, who asked, do you have any tips for memorizing Russian grammar, which is pretty difficult? It is. I think for grammar, I always like to think in terms of patterns. So you can study the theory, do a bit of that. It's like looking at the map, really, of a new district you've arrived in. But actually knowing your way around the district, you've got to get out into the streets, take a few wrong turnings, and walk around a lot until you've got that map actually in real life in your head. And it's a bit like that with grammar, I think. Think about patterns, use chunks of language again. Because, yes, you cannot apply a table of Russian declensions of nouns and adjectives on the fly when you're trying to talk. But don't stress it. Keep going. Every so often, go back to first principles, what I call taking your game apart. Go and read the rules again. You can do some exercises, written exercise if you've got a textbook with exercises in, which has the answers in the back. Correct and control in a more formal, focused study sort of approach. You could then do those exercises again, recording yourself on your phone. Try and do them orally, listen verbally, and listen back and correct that way. So if you're struggling with the rules, that's one approach. But try and focus on getting the communication across in the early stages when you're a beginner and when you're lower intermediate. Then you can return to the grammar as you become an upper intermediate and an advanced learner, or you can read some of the theory once you've got some practice under your belt. It's no use spending time learning about the language. You want to be learning and engaging with the language in an active way. And I agree with Helen, if you're actually thinking about the grammar, then it gets in the way. And remember this, most of the people you're talking to who are native speakers do not care about your grammar. They're interested in you, they're interested in the message, they want some information from you, or you want to get some information from them. So that's very encouraging at the early stages. It can become a bit frustrating when you're an upper intermediate or an advanced language learner because people are too polite perhaps to correct you. Then you need to find a teacher or ask a friend, hey, could we just have a talk for half an hour? And can you point out some of the repeat mistakes that I'm making? You could do something like that once you get to the advanced stage. But actually, when you're a beginner or intermediate, people just want to understand your message. And for that, understandable pronunciation doesn't have to be perfect. They know you're a foreigner, but so that they can understand you. So focus in particular on the sounds that don't exist or aren't used in the same way in your own language. That's one key. And lots of words is the other. Because if you can't get your message through, usually it's going to be lack of words, not lack of grammar, that is holding you back. So I'd say that with Russian, Victor. And yes, Victor feels that mistakes are made constantly when speaking grammar. When speaking, grammar mistakes are made. As I say, don't stress it. It goes with the territory. And the more you listen as well, because input is really important, and the more you read, occasionally going back to first principles, going back to the theory, the more confident you will feel in using the patterns. And then, as I say, you can work with a coach or a teacher and say, can you listen to me? Can you look at my writing? What are the most important mistakes I'm making? And a good teacher will know not to correct everything, but just to correct the things which really are sticking out as the worst mistakes. Depends on your level, of course. Once you get to upper intermediate and advanced, then they will be fine-tuning your language. But that's fine. It's, everything has its time, has its stage. Hello, Chris. Are you still in Denmark? What's your favorite trip? What's the favorite trip you ever took? It doesn't have to be language related. Wow. I've done loads of great trips in my life. One of the most interesting ones actually was when I went to Ethiopia, which was back in 2014. My sister spent 4 years working there, and it was very exciting to go to that country. That was a wonderful trip and such an eye-opener. It's again a very culturally diverse place. So that was very exciting. The first time I went to the Soviet Union in 1990, for me, was really interesting too. And that was something and is something that will always stick with me. So there have been very many trips that I've enjoyed doing. And there's a lot of traveling I'd love to do still. But I think the Ethiopia trip is one of the most interesting that I've done in terms of being in Africa for the first time, being in a very ancient culture. I went to Lalibela, which has the wonderful, a bit like Petra, cathedrals carved out of the rocks, but not the side of a cliff, but carved down. And that was fascinating to see. Okay. So Sean Chai asks, have you got any tips or favorite resources for Russian? With Russian, I think, what are my tips with Russian? If you're starting Russian, then don't stress the alphabet. Don't be put off by the Russian alphabet. You can actually learn that in a week or so. Some of the letters are very similar to the Latin alphabet that we use anyway. And you can just learn that, as I say, very quickly and dive straight in. I would always use a textbook initially, use one which has audio that comes with it, and try and get a sense of the music of the language. So the soft sounds that they have for the consonants, the stress in the language as well is a bit different from English. So these are things you can focus on initially. But with Russian, one of the biggest frustrations I feel when you're starting is the case system. I always joke, you need to know 6 cases before you can order a cup of coffee. Of course, you don't really. And it goes back to not getting hung up about grammar. So I would just say, do dive in with Russian. Don't be scared of it. It did, for me as a native English speaker, take me a lot longer to get ahead in Russian than it had done in German. So I learned Russian first, actually. And I felt that when I then afterwards learnt German, it took me, I got in 6 months as far as it had taken me 2 years to reach in Russian. So because German is a much closer language to English, and because I'd already got more language learning experience myself at that stage, the German went much quicker. So Russian is quite a slow language, but it's perfectly doable. And you should certainly not be put off sticking in there and getting lots of practice. So that's what I'd say about learning any language, really. When you're starting off, what I like to do is focus on the core. Try and, focus on the highest frequency words, what I call also, which are, 50%, the first 100 words is typically 50% of any language. And then the next 600 or 700 takes you up to 70% of the language. You get up to 1,000, 2,000 words, it's 80% of the average conversation. So you need, when you're starting Russian or any language, somehow to learn those words. There are different ways of doing it, as we've been saying. Then you also need to learn vocabulary which is particular to you. So the sort of questions you're going to be asked, you need to learn to talk a bit about your family, perhaps, about your job, about your reasons for learning the language, and to start focusing in on some phrases and vocabulary with any particular interest of yours that you're going to want to get involved with through the language. So that's your personal core, if you like, vocabulary. And then learn toolkit phrases. So could you repeat that, please? I don't understand. Could you say that again? What does X mean in Russian, in English? Or how do you say Y in Russian? Learn toolkit phrases like that. Then you're equipped as quickly as possible to start learning the language through the medium of learning the target language in that target language. And that's a great way, I think, to feel that you're making progress, and focusing, yes, on some of the core structures that you're going to need too, which is why I find following a course or a textbook is a good thing. How many of those books do you actually read? So Drunken Chess Playing Slob says, last time I read a book start to finish, I must have been about 5. Textbooks I do work through. Some people find they like them to get started and then they lose interest halfway through and leave them. That's fine too. It depends what sort of person you are, whether you're a completer finisher type or whether you want to dive in. And sometimes it can be, linked with your personality type. Are you more of the introvert, bookish type, or more of an extrovert? Again, look at try and choose methods that work for your personality. There's not one perfect method, but the methods do all have certain common characteristics. They involve you getting a lot of input, listening a lot, reading a lot, and then they involve you, whenever you start, whether you speak from day one or later on, eventually doing a lot of speaking as well and active interaction with a language, and they involve you coming up against resistance. That's to say, embracing the frustration. Whether you do that by testing yourself through spaced recall, through translating backwards and forwards, which some very successful language learners do, even though it seems like a difficult method, or whether it's just by struggling through lots and lots of conversations or in a real life situation, there is frustration. It's part of language learning. So don't think that is something wrong with you. It is a frustrating and messy business for everybody. And I think that's one of the reasons kids find it easier in a way to learn languages, because they just focused on the goal, what they want, life coming at them. They don't have their ego in the way, and they're prepared to embrace the struggle and sort of keep struggling on anyway with language. And I think that's at times what we do have to do. So that's what I would say for starting with Russian or any language really. Focus on the core essentials, take the sound seriously, and focus on your core vocabulary, and just get in there, get lots of input, and don't be afraid of the frustrations of forgetting, of feeling that you can't cope with the grammar, of feeling you're not as far as ahead as you should be at this stage. Again, who knows where you should be? It depends on all sorts of variables, how much time you've got, what your natural talents are, whether you've got a chance to go to the country and that sort of exposure or not. So there are many variables. It's a question of getting better yourself stage by stage and keeping going for the long term that way. So that's the way I think to do it. And of course, if you can study intensively at the beginning, I think that's great too. It's what I call the rocket analogy. A lot of energy to get off the ground. If you can do that rapidly at the beginning, then I think that's a great thing. I was able to do that much more when I was a student, when I had a lot more time, when I was learning Welsh or Russian. With my Basque or Japanese now, I have to, like most people, once they've left college or school, before they retire, have to fit my language learning in around a lot of other commitments. And that does just slow it down. And that's normal, I think, and it's not a problem. It's not a race either, I think, language learning. At the end of the day, if you've got real reasons and a long-term vision of where you want to get for the language, sometimes you go faster, sometimes you go slower, as long as you're still moving forward, I suppose. So I don't want this to, I don't think any more questions coming that I've missed. What else I want to say? I just wanted to summarize. I did on the YouTube channel and on the blog a few months ago a series called the Dr. Popkins Method, where I was trying to pull out what my approach to language learning is. So I thought I might just briefly summarize some of the conclusions there, although some of it's come up before we finish. Thank you, Helen. Great, okay. There's some more questions now. So Angela's here. I'm slowly making my way through 200 books. I'm still listening to audiobooks while reading. Okay, Angela, that's extremely impressive. And reading like that is one of the best things you can do. I suppose we call that extensive reading. And you're just getting chunk patterns, a feast of correct language. Do listen a lot as well. You're doing that because you've got audiobooks, Angela, because of the stress being so important in Russian. But it sounds like, you're doing incredibly well if you're doing all that reading at 5 years. There's a series called, is it Krasnaya Kalinka? I think it's one that my friend Maureen Millward recommends. If you write to me afterwards, I can try and look it up. But there is a publisher who produces graded material in Russian for intermediate learners, and that might be a good place to look. But it sounds like you've got stacks of material already, and so that's one I think well done on you. That's something you can just keep doing, Angela. I mean, it's amazing. 200 books. I don't know whether I've read 200 books in Russian, despite learning for 20 years. I probably have, actually. But it's a great thing. Are there online resources you're using, Angela? What do you? I don't know. How are you getting these books? Are they physical books? Do you have them on the Kindle so that you can, use a built-in integrated dictionary? What do you do when you come up against words that you don't know in a language? Do you perhaps, what I do is just underline them and keep going, because otherwise I get constantly distracted if I'm going to the dictionary. And often I find I work out what the word is. If it keeps coming up and I don't understand it, and it's obviously key to the plot, then I might look it up. But if it's just an adjective describing something and I can work out more or less from the context, I don't stop. I underline the words with the intention of going back and going through them all, making a list of them or picking out some sentences later on, although I often end up not doing that. So, yeah, the Dr. Popkins method, what did it boil down for me? How have I got fluent in languages? I thought I'd just briefly, a couple of minutes, say something on that. I think being clear on your motivation is one of the conclusions I came to. So your long-term goal, why am I learning this language? Because I want to go and travel in the country, because I've got a partner I want to speak to in the language, because if you're an older person, my grandchildren speak the language, because I want to get a job, or I need the language for my job, because I'm into anime, or I'm into a certain pop group, or whatever it is. Be clear why you're doing it, what the end goal is. Do you just want to order beer as a tourist, or do you actually want to end up becoming a poet in the language? There's a difference. Decide where you're going to go. Then when you're starting, focus on the core stuff first. I think textbooks are good for this because they focus in on a good modern conversationally based course. Whether it's actually a physical textbook or a course online, will focus in on the core structures and vocab that you need. Supplement that with your toolkit phrases that I mentioned earlier, and the vocabulary and phrases that you need for your life personally. What I like to do as well is deliberately build out what they call islands of fluency, particular areas that I want to be able to talk about. So I like actually learning phrases and words associated with different domains in life. Fruits and vegetables, the kitchen, to do with my job, to do with driving the car, to do with getting onto the internet, whatever it is. I like to sort of take a sort of methodical, thematic approach to building these islands of fluency. That might not be for you. You might prefer a more, take it as it comes approach. Again, it comes down to personality. But try and build up your vocab, because your vocab is more important at the end of the day than the grammar. Set interim path goals. So not just the vision goal, why am I learning the language, but where do I want to be? Because that's too vague. I want to be fluent in Spanish in 2 years' time. It's too vague as a guide for action now. And that goes back to the problems that you can have with motivation, Jay was saying earlier on. But if you say, well, I want to finish, so if I'm doing Japanese now, I've got 3 months to work through this textbook, for example. And that really then, what happens after that is irrelevant. I just have to get to that staging post. So with Angela, it might be, I want to read 10 books in the next X number of months in Russian, whatever it is. Or I want to be doing 3 posts on my Facebook feed in the language every week of at least 30 words each. Whatever it is, set yourself for the next month. Yeah, set yourself path goals that you can reach, staging points where you can feel a degree of satisfaction. Then you can take a step back or do something else, or you won't have time for a while. And then you can set another one. That's a great way to keep moving forward and climbing that mountain. And for those path goals, I think a month ahead or 3 months maximum ahead is a good distance. So long enough to make a real difference, to feel some progress, but not so long that you can just postpone and it becomes too vague indefinitely, taking action. So setting interim path goals, lots of listening, something I've always thought was really important, and delaying actually going to the country until I've got to a lower intermediate or at least an upper advanced level. What am I talking about here? Well, it's great to go before you start or when you've just started, like I did to the Basque Country. You know, you become inspired, you taste the food, you meet some people, you see the landscape, you see the buildings, you get a sense of the smells and the sounds of a place. And that can really be, they can be memories that sustain you then as you go. But if you want to get maximum bang for your buck in terms of using the language on the ground, you already need quite a base to be able to do that. When you're traveling anyway, it's tiring. There are lots of exciting other new things to experience, not just the language. So you probably, if you're going on whether it's a 2-week holiday to a country or a 6-month stay, if you're going on a student exchange, you're going to start a new job. Again, there'll be a whole lot of other demands on you beside the language. So try and get to the lower intermediate level before you go. That's what I've tended to do anyway, in my experience. It's what I'm doing with the Japanese at the moment. It's what I did previously when I went to live in Russia many moons ago. And when you get there, I've always insisted on speaking. This can take some negotiation if you're in an area where English is spoken a lot. But you do have to seek out early on social circles, go to places where it's not going to be just tourists. It's not going to be in the hotel, at the hotel reception desk, where people are busy and are maybe used to using English with foreigners. Go somewhere like a local cafe, which is where the locals hang out, or sports, if that's what you're into, where people will be interested in you, or you share a common interest. And the issue is not I am the foreigner so much as let's talk about, or do something else which is not focused on the language. And the language is then you're having to use it incidentally rather than as the main focus. So insist on speaking, get into the culture, whatever aspect of it is that excites you. Get into it, learn more about the language and the culture, and also learn about the communication style in the language. How does politeness work, including body language and tone, intonation in the country? Because it might be a bit different from what you're used to. So, for example, Spanish speakers I find tend to speak a lot louder. Russians often stand much closer to you than we would do in English. There are some cultures I understand where you're not supposed to look people in the eye if they're more senior to you. Whereas in English culture, if you don't look people in the eye, it's thought to be shifty and dishonest. So you've got to be careful. You can learn about interpreting these things to avoid miscommunication. You cut some slack, of course, aren't you, when you're a learner? But it's interesting to get into all that stuff as well. So those are the approaches personally that I've used, and I have found that they have worked for me. To take a higher level, though, we've all got different personalities. You may not like the more methodical approach that I take. Do what seems to keep you interested. It's got to be relevant to your level, but also relevant to your personal interests. Make a habit out of it, as I've said several times, and make sure there's some sort of community engagement to give it a wider meaning, as I say, so that your engagement with the language doesn't become just it's not just about you learning the language, but it's about shared interests and shared relationships, which are bigger than you and actually bigger than your language project. I think that's great advice. So just maybe to wind up, I just wanted to say again, thanks very much for your support for the channel. And any thoughts about how the channel should develop, that would be very interesting, either now or underneath later when I post the recording. I've been doing twice a week postings for the last year, mainly tips on Tuesday. There's a new series just kicked off about using a language teacher to best effect. And there'll be another one of those coming up next Tuesday. And then I've been doing often a longer piece about methods, or an interview on Thursday, or travel vlogs. Travel vlogs don't get so much viewership because I think a lot of you are more focused on language learning, but I enjoy doing them anyway. And for me, it's part of a love of foreign cultures and travel. It all ties into language. So I'm going to keep doing them, even if they pull my viewing figures down a bit. But the key focus will be still on language. Is twice a week too often or not? I'd be interested to know. And Yeah, I wanted to ask too, should I be starting to do more tutorial type videos on the languages where I have probably the most to offer? So those are German and Russian, Welsh, French, my most advanced languages. Should I start to do some YouTube tutorials on the channel? Would you like that? That's a question I've got. Another question I'm wondering about is, do those of you who are subscribed to the channel also engage with howtogetfluent.com with the blog? Or those of you who've come to this through the email club through howtogetfluent.com, why have you not looked in on YouTube before? So which medium do you all prefer and why? Why do you prefer YouTube, or why do you prefer blogs? Not just with me, but with other people you engage with, other content creators too. Should I start doing some sort of podcast format? So should I just take the audio and put it onto podcast? Some people might like that, even if it's not a proper podcast, if they're trying to listen in the car, for example. That's something else I've been thinking about. But at the moment anyway, subject to the sort of feedback I get, my plan is to continue with the twice weekly postings here on YouTube for the coming months at least. The next thing coming up in my language learning is going to be, pressing on with the Japanese, and also going to the Polyglot Gathering at the end of this month. It's actually the gatherings at the beginning of June in Bratislava, and I'll be speaking there. So I'm working on my talk at the moment. I've done daily vlogs from there for the last 2 years, which have gone down quite well. And I'm hoping to do that again. Whether I'll actually do them during the event or edit them up afterwards rather than staying up virtually the whole night, I'm not sure yet. I may go for the more relaxed approach, but I'm going to be out and about with my camera anyway. So there'll be more language-focused vlogs to come. So just let's have another look at the question flow here. Helen, how do you record how much time you spend on different language activities? Helen, I used to have a spreadsheet on Google Docs, but I always tend to revert to the low-tech solutions. And here it is. This is how I do it. I take a little sheet of paper and I just put down, I don't know if you can see that, the time I've spent and what I've done each day. It's as low-tech as that. So, for example, today between, if you can see that, 7:45 and 8:15, I worked on, that's actually 2 JFZ, so volume 2 of Japanese from 0, and the pages I did, the exercises I did. And that's the way I'm able to report back on the blog and in the vlogs how much Japanese study I've done. Or when occasionally I report back on the Basque. It's good for me to control how efficient I am and whether I'm where I expect I should be based on my experience. But also it's a sense of where did all the time go, because we do forget. And sometimes it's important to take a step back and to pat ourselves on the back and think, yeah, I have actually put in a lot of time here. You want to feel progress. A way to do that over time is maybe to record the odd video of yourself or the odd recording of yourself speaking, and then listen again in 2 months' time at it. Or try and read the same piece 2 months later. Or go back to the early chapters of the textbook that you're working on after a couple of months and feel the progress. It's important that we play, the motivational mind games with ourselves, I think. To help keep us going. Hello, Luke. Hi. Thank you very much for the congratulations. I don't know, Luke has a YouTube channel, a great channel as well, with some really good advice on there. I don't know whether you've done, I think, a few lives already, Luke. This is the first one I've actually done. How you use your languages, Toast asks. Your favorite books, what your favorite TV shows are, and how you maintain them. Yeah, great. This is a great topic. It's a huge topic, though. Toast, and how do I use them? At the moment, Welsh is the first one I got fluent in, as I said. Every day I read news sites in Welsh. I also follow a lot of people on Twitter in Welsh. And I have very long-standing friendships in Welsh. But my Welsh is so entrenched that it's not something I consciously make an effort to maintain. So an old friend of 20 years standing was in London the other day, and he came, we went for a meal, for example. So it was the first time I'd spoken Welsh probably for 6 months, since I was at the National Eisteddfod in August, the cultural festival. So that's another thing, actually. Sometimes with my higher languages, I use the annual calendar of different events. So, for example, I went to the Orthodox ceremony at Easter last year in the Orthodox Cathedral. So you can, it could be a big sporting event that happens once a year that you follow. Try and build in seasonality is a great way to get using your languages. So that's the Welsh. I read a lot in Welsh too. Russian, I'm watching an awful lot on YouTube. So there's a series called Kuchnia, which is a television comedy, which I really like, which is all up on YouTube. I'm also watching one called Na Kraju, which means on the edge, which is a new one, which is all about ISIS and Islamic State and Russians who've got entangled in various ways. It's a sort of political thriller, very contemporary. That's also on YouTube. There's another one I like called Moskovskaya Barzaya, which is set in Nizhny Novgorod, which is east of Moscow, a city I've actually been to, very beautiful and interesting city, which is a krimi, a whodunit type, and it's in the second series. So that's one I watch as well. So I often watch actually a Russian comedy or one of the episodes or half an episode last thing at night before I go to bed, when I'm metaphorically drinking my cocoa, as it were. That is something I like to do last thing. With the German, I listen to a lot of German news. So I listen to the Berlin news often on the phone actually now. So I've got an app here on the phone. It's called, RBB Info Radio. So that's the German Berlin news radio. And I listen also a lot to Basque radio. So I've got AITV, which is the Basque radio. So I just call that up on the radio, and this is the Basque. It's in the speakers. You can't hear it because it's coming through the speakers, but I'll switch that off. I listen to that actually when I'm running. I got these earbuds, so when I'm running, I'm listening to native level Basque. I don't understand a lot of it, yeah, okay, sorry, I'll wind up there, Toast. Sorry, I'm going on and on. He says, not now, that's enough, which he says. Yeah, you're right. I've gone on far too long, perhaps, so we should be winding it up. I guess we're like nearly an hour in. So I just wanted to really thank you all for being here. I didn't know, we've got 12 people on at the moment. I didn't know whether anyone was going to turn up at all. And I certainly really hadn't expected as many as 12. So that's been great. Thank you very much. And for being with me and for celebrating this milestone. And if you'd like me to do more of these, again, you can put comments underneath, and I could maybe make it rather more regular, a sort of catch up, maybe a bit more thematic, or if you like the question and answer format, we could stick with this. If you haven't yet join the email club over at howtogetfluent.com. That's the best way to keep in touch and to get updates of the latest content. But also, of course, if you, as I always say, tickle that bell here on YouTube, you'll get notifications when a new video goes up. And that's a great thing to do. It actually really helps the channel, as does giving a thumbs up. It sort of helps the channel show the videos in people's feeds. Which is great for getting a real community going. I've got a community tab now as well that I've reached 1,000 subs, and I used that for the first time yesterday to announce this live session. So that's it. I'm going to wind it up now. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Spasibo большое za внимание. Vielen Dank. And arigato gozaimasu. And thanks a lot for being with me this time. And I look forward to our language learning journey together, wherever it all takes us. Let me know your challenges and your successes in your own language learning. Keep those questions coming through the various channels, whether it's YouTube comments, through email, through the website and the email club, in the How to Get Fluent Facebook group. There are lots of ways to get in touch. I love making this a two-way community. Thank you very much, and till the next time. See you soon. Bye-bye.